The elevator doors opened to a floor that didn't exist on any building directory I'd ever seen. Concrete walls, exposed pipes, and a smell like something had been rotting for months. The button panel still glowed, 13, even though this building only had 12 floors. I was working late again at the accounting firm downtown. Nothing unusual, just another Thursday night trying to meet a deadline that seemed impossible. The building was nearly empty by 9 p.m. Just me and maybe the night security guard somewhere downstairs. I'd done this routine hundreds of times before. The elevator was one of those old ones from the 1970s, all wood paneling and brass buttons that had turned green with age. It made these groaning sounds that always made me slightly nervous, but it had never actually broken down. At least not until that night. I pressed the button for the ground floor like always. The elevator started its descent, first floor, second floor, third floor. But then it just kept going. The numbers on the display kept changing: 4, 5, 6, 7. I felt that familiar stomach drop sensation you get when an elevator moves. But we were clearly going down past the lobby level. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then 13. The number 13 appeared on the display, glowing that sickly green color. I stared at it, confused. This building definitely didn't have a 13th floor. I'd worked here for 3 years. Hell, most buildings skip the 13th floor entirely because of superstition. The elevator stopped with a mechanical clunk that seemed louder than usual. The doors opened. What I saw made my mouth dry. Instead of a normal floor with offices and carpeting, I was looking at what appeared to be some kind of unfinished basement level. Concrete walls stretched into darkness, interrupted by thick pipes that dripped condensation onto the floor. Bare fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, casting harsh shadows that seemed to move on their own. But it was the smell that really got to me. Sweet and cloying, like fruit left too long in the sun, mixed with something metallic that reminded me of the time I'd cut my hand badly on a rusty fence as a kid. I stood there in the elevator doorway, finger hovering over the closed door button. Every instinct told me to press it immediately and get the hell out of there. But curiosity, that damned human curiosity, made me hesitate. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from somewhere in the darkness ahead. Not the click of dress shoes on tile, but the wet slap of bare feet on concrete. Getting closer. I jabbed the closed door button frantically. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, then tried the 1 button for the lobby. The elevator didn't respond. The footsteps were getting louder now, accompanied by what sounded like heavy breathing or maybe whimpering. Come on, I whispered, pressing every button on the panel. Finally, the doors started to close. But slowly, so slowly that I could have crawled faster. Just before they sealed shut, I saw something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the corridor. Tall, unnaturally thin, wearing what looked like a hospital gown that was stained dark with something I didn't want to identify. But it was the way it moved that really terrified me, jerky, like a marionette being controlled by someone who didn't quite know how to work the strings. The doors finally closed. The elevator lurched upward, and within seconds I was back in the familiar lobby. I practically ran to my car and drove home without looking back. The next morning, I asked building security about the basement levels. The guard, a guy named Frank who'd worked there for 15 years, looked at me like I was crazy. Basement levels? There's just a storage room and the parking garage. Nothing else down there. And definitely no 13th floor button in that elevator. I went back to check. He's right. The elevator panel went straight from 12 to the ground floor button. No 13 anywhere. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in that elevator, I swear I can still smell that sweet, rotting smell seeping through the walls. And I never work past 8 p.m. anymore. The man in the elevator with me didn't blink once during the entire 40-second ride to the top floor. Not once. I counted. This happened 3 months ago, but I still take the stairs whenever possible now. I was working the night shift at City General Hospital. I'm a nurse in the ICU, and we were short-staffed that week. It was around 20:30 a.m. when I needed to grab some supplies from the storage room on the 8th floor. The hospital at night is already unsettling enough. Dim hallways, the constant beeping of machines, and that antiseptic smell that never quite masks the underlying odors of human suffering. But I'd gotten used to it over the years. You have to, in this job. I called the elevator from the 5th floor ICU. When it arrived, it was empty, which was normal for that time of night. I stepped in and pressed the button for 8. Just as the doors started to close, a hand shot through the gap, triggering the sensor to reopen them. A man stepped in. He was probably in his 50s, wearing a rumpled suit that looked like he'd slept in it. His hair was disheveled, and his skin had that grayish pallor you sometimes see in patients who've been in the hospital too long. Nothing too unusual. Could have been a family member who'd been sitting vigil with a loved one. Which floor? I asked politely. He looked at me then, and that's when I noticed his eyes. They were completely bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. But it was more than that. There was something wrong with the way he was staring at me. Too intense. Too focused. Eat, he said in a voice that sounded like sandpaper. I nodded and faced forward as the elevator began to rise. That's when I became aware of his breathing. It was too loud, too deliberate, like he was manually controlling each breath instead of letting it happen naturally. Out of my peripheral vision, I could see that he was still staring at me. Not just looking, staring. The kind of stare that makes your skin crawl, like you're being examined under a microscope. Floor 6. Floor 7. I started counting his blinks because I needed something to focus on other than the growing sense of unease in my stomach. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. He never looked away from me, and his eyes never closed. Not even for the quick, involuntary blinks that humans do automatically. The elevator was moving so slowly it felt like we were suspended in amber. I could hear my own heartbeat getting louder, competing with his strange, measured breathing. Floor 8. Finally, the doors opened, and I stepped out quickly, mumbling something about having a good night. I didn't look back, but I could feel his eyes on me as I walked down the hallway toward the supply room. I grabbed what I needed as fast as possible, but when I came back to the elevator bank, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice water. The elevator was still there, doors still open, exactly as I'd left it. He was still inside, still staring, still not blinking, but now he was smiling. I took the stairs down 5 flights, my legs shaking with each step. When I got back to the ICU, I asked Janet, the senior nurse, if she'd seen anyone matching his description visiting patients on 8. "Honey, there are no patient rooms on 8, she said, looking at me with concern. 8 is just storage and old equipment. Has been for months since they moved everything to the new wing. I felt sick. But he said he was going to 8. Who said that? I described the man to her, but Janet just shook her head. I've been here since midnight, and I haven't seen anyone like that. Are you feeling okay? You look pale. I checked the visitor logs for that night. No one had signed in after 10 p.m. The next week, I was working another night shift when I saw him again. Same elevator, same floor, same unblinking stare. This time I didn't get on. I watched the doors close with him still inside, still looking at me through the narrowing gap. The elevator went up to the 8th floor and stayed there for 20 minutes. When it finally came back down, it was empty. I transferred to the day shift the following month. But sometimes I still dream about those bloodshot eyes that never blinked, and that smile that looked like it belonged on something that had forgotten how to be human. The elevator plummeted for 17 floors past the basement level before I realized we weren't stopping at any floor that should exist. I need to tell someone about this, even though I know how insane it sounds. My name is David, and I worked as a maintenance technician for a high-rise office complex in downtown Seattle. I've been doing building maintenance for over a decade, so I know elevators better than most people. I know their sounds, their rhythms, their quirks. This happened last Tuesday night. I was doing a routine inspection of the elevator systems in the Meridian Tower, a 38-story building that houses various corporate offices. It was around 11 p.m., and the building was completely empty except for me and the security guard downstairs. I started on the top floor and worked my way down, checking each elevator's mechanical systems and safety features. Everything was normal until I got to elevator C, the one on the east side of the building. When I pressed the call button, I immediately noticed something odd. The elevator was already coming up from way below the basement level. The floor indicator showed it was at B4, which was impossible. This building only has 2 basement levels, B1 for parking and B2 for mechanical systems and storage. But the indicator kept climbing B3, B2, B1, ground, and then it stopped at my floor. When the doors opened, everything looked normal. Same mirrored walls, same industrial carpeting, same brass handrail. I stepped inside and pressed the button for B2, so I could check the elevator's motor room. That's when things went wrong. The elevator started descending normally at first. Ground floor B1, B2, but then it kept going. B3 appeared on the display, then B4, B5, B6. I watched in growing alarm as the numbers continued climbing downward. B7, B8, B9. I pressed the emergency stop button. Nothing happened. I tried pressing B2 again, then B1, then the ground floor. The elevator ignored every command and continued its descent into levels that shouldn't exist. The worst part was the sound. Normally, elevator cables make a steady whirring noise, but this sounded different. Strained. Like the cables were being stretched beyond their limits. I could hear creaking and groaning from the shaft walls, as if the building itself was being stretched downward. B10, B11, B12. The air started getting thicker, harder to breathe. It reminded me of being in a deep cave, that oppressive feeling of tons of earth pressing down from above. My ears popped like I was in an airplane gaining altitude, except we were going down. B13, B14, B15. I started to panic. I'd been in this building hundreds of times, and I knew for a fact that we should have hit bedrock, or the water table by now. The elevator should have crashed through the bottom of the shaft and into Seattle's underground. But we just kept falling. That's when I noticed the emergency phone. I grabbed it and dialed the security desk. Jimmy, this is David. I'm trapped in elevator C and it won't stop. It's taking me down to levels that don't exist. Static crackled through the line. Then Jimmy's voice came through, distorted and strange. David, where are you, man? I've been looking for you. Your truck's still in the parking garage, but you never checked in after the inspection. I'm in the elevator! It's been falling for 5 minutes straight. We're at B16 now. More static. Then, David, that's impossible. I'm looking at the elevator panel right now. Elevator C is sitting on the ground floor. Has been all night. B17, B18, B19. Jimmy, you have to believe me. Look, I'm gonna try the emergency hatch. I put the phone down and pushed against the ceiling panel. It wouldn't budge. I put all my weight behind it, and finally it popped open. What I saw above me defied every law of physics I thought I understood. Instead of the elevator shaft I expected, there was just darkness. Not the darkness of a deep shaft, but absolute blackness that seemed to swallow the light from the elevator completely. No cables, no guide rails, no shaft walls, just void. I slammed the hatch shut and grabbed the phone again. The shaft is gone, but the line was dead. B20, B21, B22. I don't know how long I fell. Time seemed to stretch and compress at the same time. The air kept getting thicker, and I started feeling lightheaded. The elevator's lights began to flicker, casting crazy shadows on the walls. Then, at B23, something changed. The elevator started slowing down. Not stopping, just slowing, like it was approaching its destination. I felt that familiar stomach lift sensation as the car decelerated. B23. The doors opened. I stepped out into what looked like a perfect replica of the Meridian Tower's lobby. Same marble floors, same reception desk, same artificial plants in the corners. But everything was wrong. The colors were too saturated, like someone had turned up the contrast on a television. The lighting came from nowhere and everywhere at once, casting no shadows, and it was completely silent. Not just quiet, absolutely silent in a way that made my ears ring. I walked to the reception desk and found a building directory mounted on the wall. According to the directory, I was on the ground floor of the Meridian Tower, but instead of listing the businesses and offices I knew by heart, every single floor was listed the same way: David Martimide M, A-Man C, every floor. All 38 of them, plus the basement levels, all the way down to B23. I ran back to the elevator and pressed the call button. When the doors opened, I lunged inside and frantically pressed 1 for the ground floor. The real ground floor. The elevator rose quickly, too quickly. I felt like I was being shot upward through a cannon. The floor numbers climbed rapidly: B22, B21, B20, and so on until finally reaching B2, B1, and then the ground floor. When the doors opened, I was back in the real lobby. Jimmy was there, looking worried. There you are. I've been calling your radio for 20 minutes. Where were you? I looked at my watch. It was 11:23 p.m. I'd entered the elevator at 11:20. 3 minutes. The whole experience had lasted 3 minutes. I told Jimmy I wasn't feeling well and went home early. The next day, I quit my job. I couldn't bring myself to go back into that building, let alone use those elevators. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. Last week, I drove past the Meridian Tower just to see if it was still there. It was. But when I counted the floors from the outside, I could swear there were more windows than there should be. More floors stretching up into the sky. And in the basement level windows, I could see lights flickering. Lights that shouldn't exist, in levels that should never have been built. At 3:47 a.m., the elevator stopped on the 7th floor, and a woman got on who had been dead for 6 years. I know her name was Sarah Chen because I looked it up later in the newspaper archives. But that night, Standing in that elevator, all I knew was that something was terribly wrong with the woman who had just stepped into the car with me. I was working as a night janitor at the Grandview Apartments, a converted office building in the older part of downtown. 12 floors of mostly elderly residents and young professionals who couldn't afford anything better. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid decent money for someone like me who preferred working alone. My routine was simple: start at the top floor and work my way down, cleaning hallways, emptying trash, checking that all the common area lights were working. I'd been doing it for about 8 months without incident. That particular night felt different from the moment I arrived. The building seemed quieter than usual, and several of the hallway lights were flickering in a way that made the shadows dance strangely on the walls. I chalked it up to old wiring and made a mental note to mention it to the building manager. I finished the 12th floor around 30:30 a.m. and called the elevator to head down to 11. When it arrived, I noticed the car felt unusually cold. Not just cool, cold enough that I could see my breath when I exhaled. I figured the building's heating system was acting up again. I pressed the button for the 11th floor and settled back for the short ride. That's when the elevator stopped at 7. Even though I hadn't pressed that button, the doors opened with their usual mechanical wheeze, and she stepped in. She looked to be around 30, with long black hair and pale skin. She was wearing a simple white dress that looked almost vintage, like something from the 1950s. What struck me immediately was how perfectly still she stood. No fidgeting, no checking her phone, no normal human movement at all. "Good morning," I said, trying to be polite despite the early hour. She turned to look at me, and that's when I saw her eyes. They were completely black. Not just dark brown or even very dark, black like obsidian, with no visible iris or pupil. Just solid black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Going down," she said in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I pressed the button for the ground floor, assuming that's where she wanted to go. The elevator continued its descent 10th floor, 9th, 8th. But I kept glancing at her out of the corner of my eye, and each time I looked, something seemed different about her. Her dress, which had appeared white when she first got on, was gradually becoming darker. Not gray or dirty, darker, like someone was slowly turning down the brightness on a television screen. By the time we reached the 6th floor, it was definitely gray. 5th floor, it was charcoal. 4th floor, it was black. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that she cast no reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls. I could see myself clearly, my mop bucket, my cleaning cart, everything except her. She was a complete absence in the mirrors, like a Sarah-shaped hole in reality. The elevator kept descending past the ground floor. 2nd basement, 3rd basement, levels that I knew didn't exist in this building. But the floor indicator kept showing us going down B4, B5, B6. I tried to press the emergency stop button, but my hand passed right through it. Not like it was broken, like it wasn't physically there. I tried pressing the ground floor button again, but the same thing happened. My finger went right through the button as if it were a hologram. "You're going to be late," the woman said without looking at me. "Late for what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "For your appointment." The elevator finally stopped at B7. The doors opened, and instead of seeing a basement or mechanical room, I was looking at what appeared to be a hospital corridor. White walls, fluorescent lighting, that distinctive antiseptic smell. But the hallway stretched into darkness in both directions, and I couldn't see any doors or rooms. "This is your stop," she said. "No, I think there's been a mistake. I need to get back to the ground floor." She turned to face me fully for the first time, and I saw that her entire dress was now completely black, almost like it was made of shadow. Her skin had taken on a waxy, translucent quality, and I could see dark veins running underneath like a roadmap of decay. "You've been late before," she said. "On March 15, 2018. You were supposed to visit your father in the hospital, but you chose to work instead. You were 3 hours late." I felt the blood drain from my face. She was right. My father had been in the hospital for routine surgery, and I'd promised to visit him that evening. But I'd picked up an extra shift at another building because I needed the money. By the time I got to the hospital, visiting hours were over. "He waited for you," she continued. "He waited until 11 p.m., even though he was supposed to be sleeping. He kept asking the nurses if his son had called." "How do you know that?" I whispered. "He died the next morning. The surgery had complications. If you'd been there, you would have been the last person to speak to him." I started backing toward the rear wall of the elevator, but there was nowhere to go. The woman, or whatever she was, stepped closer. "You were late to his funeral too." "Traffic," you said. "But you stopped for coffee on the way." She was right again. I had stopped for coffee. I told myself it was because I needed caffeine to deal with the stress. But really, I just hadn't wanted to face the reality of saying goodbye. Some appointments can't be rescheduled, she said, gesturing toward the hospital corridor beyond the elevator doors. I closed my eyes and pressed myself against the back wall. I could feel cold air flowing from the hallway, carrying with it the sound of distant machinery and the soft beeping of medical equipment. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing in the elevator on the ground floor of the Grandview Apartments. The doors were open, showing the familiar lobby with its worn carpeting and outdated furniture. The woman was gone. I looked at my watch, 3:47 a.m., the exact same time the elevator had stopped on the 7th floor. I finished my shift on autopilot, barely aware of what I was doing. The next morning, I drove to the public library and spent hours searching newspaper archives for anyone named Sarah Chen who had died in the building. I found her obituary dated 6 years ago. Sarah Chen, 31, died unexpectedly at Grandview Apartments on March 16, 2018, after suffering complications from recent surgery. She is survived by her elderly father, who was unable to visit her due to his own hospitalization. March 16, 2018. The day after my father died, I quit the janitor job that afternoon, but I still wake up sometimes at 3:47 a.m., and I swear I can hear elevator bells chiming somewhere in the distance, calling me to an appointment I'm already late for.